I think we are live.
Must be two people in the same room.
Thank you so much. So ad hoc committee, welcome to our December 7th special meeting of the ad hoc committee for the Fallbrook-Rainbow reorganization proposals. Very much appreciate everyone taking time today. It's been a couple of months since we last met, and I think you will find today will be pretty good in terms of content. So let me go ahead and ask our commission clerk to go ahead and call roll of our 10 advisory members.
Thank you. Brian Albright.
Here.
Jack Beebe.
I'm here.
David Sherishore.
Here.
Rachel Cortes.
Yes, here, Cortes. Hello?
Cortes, I'm sorry. You're
Okay.
present? Okay.
Present.
Gary Croucher.
I am here.
Nick Canettis.
Here.
Tom Kennedy.
Here.
Sandy Curl.
Here.
Lydia Romero.
Here.
Kimberly Thorner.
Present.
We have a virtual quorum with 10 present.
Thank you, Tammy. And I know we also have a number of guests on the line, and you are certainly welcome and to continue to be on the Zoom call. I would ask that our guests remain on mute. As we go through the items, we will invite an opportunity for public comment. And in particular, when we get to the guest, if you know how to use your raise hand feature on the Zoom, that probably would be the best way to take in inputs. That said, I did want to just offer up a couple of comments before we get to public comment, and that is, committee, we are live streaming today's meeting as we have the other two as well. The meeting is being live streamed on our YouTube page with links provided both on our social media accounts as well as our website. This is going to allow us, members, to take in public comments from those outside of the Zoom box via email, and there are instructions for those who are watching us on YouTube to go ahead and send emails in as the items proceed. Committee members, we will pause at the end of each item and do a check-in with Erica to see if there are any live comments. But other than that, we should be good with the agenda as it is provided. At this point, we'll move to formal public comment. Let me first check in with Tammy. Tammy, did we have any pre-registered speakers for public comment?
No, there were no registered speakers.
Thank you. And then let me check in with Erica. And there's about a 5 to 10 second delay, so we purposely speak a little slower on these parts. Erica, is there any live public comment from the great outside?
So far, no live email comments.
Very good. And then using your raise hand feature for those guests that are in the Zoom box, if you did have a general public comment, you can go ahead and raise your hand. And I am looking at the list right now. Going once, twice. Okay, no public comments. So now we're going to move committee members to our business items. We have one action item for you, and then the rest is discussion and feedback. In your packet, you will see summary minutes prepared by Tammy. I'd love to get a motion to approve.
So moved.
Thank
Second.
you, Kim. And a second, who was the second from?
Me, Lydia.
Lydia, thank you so much. We have a motion to approve the minutes as presented by committee members Thorner and Romero. This is compliant with the Brown Act. We're going to do a roll call. Tammy, if you can go down the 10 names.
Sure. Kimberly Thorner.
Aye. Yes.
Lydia Romero,
Yes.
Sandy Curl,
Yes.
Tom Kennedy,
Yes.
Nick Canettis,
Yes.
Gary Croucher,
Yes.
Rachel Cortes,
Yes.
David Sherishore, David. He's on mute.
You did yourself.
I'll come back.
I heard a
Yeah.
yes.
Okay, Jack Beebe,
I did have one clarification. Sorry, I don't want to drag this meeting out. But on the item we talked about, the review being focused on information in the record. The one thing I just wanted to make sure of is I know there's some items, we're still waiting to respond on an item. And I know there's some updates the water authority is doing on their demand analysis. So I just want to make sure that, where there's sort of updates to information that's provided as the consultant goes through, those things he'll look at. But, the main idea is we're not going to, come up with all new, lines of arguments and those types of things as we move forward. Is that correct?
Well, that's a fair question, and it's a question actually that I believe we are going to tackle and drill down on with Michael and Holly in just a bit. So the minutes were just trying to describe that it was contemplated that additional information would come. Today, we will further fine tune what that means.
Okay, so yes.
Thank you, sir.
Brian Albright.
Yes.
I have 10 yes and 0 no's. The motion passes.
Outstanding. So we'll go ahead and post those minutes up on our website. This takes us to a couple of items that Robert Berry, our Chief Policy Analyst, will cover for the committee. And Robert, I'll leave it to you to maybe cover both items at once. This is items 4B and 4C. The first being just the processing update for the reorganization itself. And then relatedly, although separately, Robert is going to give an update on the municipal service review that has been separately scheduled, but just so happens to be parallel to this project, service review involving the Fallbrook-Rainbow region. And then just as a request, Robert, when you get done with this, and this is a request for staff, let's make sure we give an opportunity to get not only questions from the committee, but let's check in with the public as well. But I'm going to turn this over to Robert Berry.
Great, thank you, Keen. Can everybody hear me okay? Good. As the executive officer mentioned, we have two proposals on the table, so to speak, that have been submitted to LAFCO, one by the Rainbow Municipal Service, or I'm sorry, the Rainbow Municipal Water District, the other by the Fallbrook Public Utility District. Both involved attachments from the County Water Authority, as everyone is aware, with concurrent annexations to the Eastern MWD for wholesale water services. So for these reorganization proposals, the typical process once it's submitted is for us to generate a status letter on the submittal, determining whether it's incomplete or complete. All proposals go through a process of confirming boundaries, assess valuations, and then property tax exchange prior to LAFCO scheduled for a hearing. So the last time we discussed these proposals, they had gone through the auditor and assessor's office and had been presented to the county for the property tax exchange. The county's discussions are ongoing. My last contact with county staff at the Planning and Development Services Department was in October. They had been in communication with the County Water Authority, somewhat to determine the overlap with the County Water Authority Act, in addition to the revenue and tax code requirements that LAFCO has on all property tax exchanges for submitted proposals. I don't have an update on that process yet. What was confirmed to me through that discussion was that the Water Authority had confirmed to the county that tax revenues are not used for debt services in relation to the Water Authority Act. And with the property tax exchange for these types of proposals, it's really about existing property tax revenues being transferred to a successor agency or the agency that would be taking over the services. most of the enterprise type districts that charge fees for services don't have property tax associated with them. Some pre-Prop 13 type districts do. In most cases, there's no exchange of property taxes, again, with the understanding that the enterprise services will pay for themselves through their fees. So at this point, there is, again, communication with the Water Authority and the Planning and Development Services Department, and that they are going to be making a recommendation and next steps to LAFCO in the near future. Again, that was about a month and a half ago. I am in contact with them to follow up to find if there's been any movement on that, but that's something I think that will be resolved moving forward as they have more information, and also so they can better understand the applicability of the County Water Authority Act with the options in front of LAFCO. So at this point, the two proposals remain incomplete technically. And again, the property tax exchange confirmation from the county is one of the last procedural steps that allows for the executive officer to file what's called a certificate of filing. That indicates that the application's complete and that the proposal is ready for hearing by the commission. So given the outstanding items that our new consultant will be working on, a number of those issues are still under review administratively. And so again, the status will remain incomplete until we get to a resolution or a position to present to the commission in addition to the property tax exchange. So that's the overview on the proposals at this point. I'd be happy to answer any questions about them, and everyone online is more than welcome to get in touch with me through my contact information if you have additional questions.
Let's pause there. Does anyone have a question amongst the 10 committee members on just the processing of the proposal for Robert? Okay, let me just check in with our guests. If there are guests in the Zoom box who have a question, I'm looking for a raised hand feature. Going once, going twice. Tammy, did we get any pre-registered comments for item 4B?
None. We did not receive any registered speakers.
Got it. And then let's just check in with Erica. Miss Erica, did we get any live email comments in the last few minutes on this?
No live email comments, but Sandy, did you have something to say?
Yes,
Sandy.
I just wanted to add to the comments that Robert made that we told the county the property tax is not secured for any particular bonds, and not that they're not used to pay for anything in particular. So I just want that clarification.
Understood. I was repeating what was relayed to me from the Property Tax Services Department. And as we move forward, we'll have more updates with a bit more definition to those, especially after I've had additional contact with planning development staff.
Great.
I also want to compliment Sandy. Not only do you look like you're physically in a canyon, you have this wonderful echoing effect that's occurring at the same time. And so there may be a feature, I don't know if you have the YouTube streaming going at the same time, but there is an echo, which I like, but nevertheless, seeing no other comments occurring here, Robert, if you'd be kind enough to go to the next item 4C.
Sure. Thanks, Kane. The Fallbrook Municipal Service Review is part of our comprehensive review of all spheres of influence in the San Diego County. So one of LAFCO's primary responsibilities is to establish spheres of influence for all the cities and special districts under LAFCO authority in the county. So that process then is required to be reviewed every 5 years and updated as necessary. And so when we go to do a review of spheres of influence on that 5-year cycle, we're required to perform what's called a municipal services review. And that covers about 7 determinations that LAFCO is required to provide in written form, covering everything from adequacy of services, level of services, service planning, finances, governance, community accountability, and in some cases, disadvantage unincorporated communities, opportunities for shared infrastructure, or other issues in terms of service efficiency and delivery. So what I wanted to do is give just a brief overview on the scope and the structure of the MSR process, just to kind of give the committee an understanding of what it is that we're looking at when we're doing a service review. It's a bit different from when we're doing a proposal review where it's project specific and we have very specific required factors of review for all proposals. For municipal services review, the understanding is that the scope is comprehensive. What we're really looking is the totality of the agency in terms of its service delivery, its community position, its governance, and any other issues that would come up that would inform the review of the sphere of influence and allow us to perform either an update or an affirmation of the sphere where it currently exists. So this is I believe, the third 5-year cycle that we've been going through since the comprehensive update of LAFCO law in 2000. The first one was around 2008. And in the last 10, 12 years, we've kind of fine-tuned the process. We have a number of service reviews that we've adopted recently that I think are really good examples in terms of the scope and the structure of the document. Just today, we adopted a draft municipal service review on resource conservation districts, which are obviously quite different than the subject agencies that we're discussing. Nonetheless, we're required to make the same 7 written determinations on those types of districts. So part of the understanding in a service review is that it's customized to address the specific services that those agencies provide. So just in terms of the scope of the Fallbrook, we're looking at basically 5 agencies, 4 primarily, but 1 being a county service area that's focused on park services. But the Fallbrook PUD, the Rainbow MWD, the North County Fire Protection District, the San Luis Rey Municipal Services District, or I'm sorry, Municipal Water District, and again, County Service Area 81, which is a county dependent district that finances parks and recreation services in the Fallbrook general area. So in terms of the scope, Fallbrook PUD covers about 44 square miles. Rainbow covers another 80 square miles. North County Fire is about 86 square miles of service area. And then San Luis Rey is about 4.4 square miles. So it covers basically the northern corridor of the 15 and the northwestern corner of the county is what we're considering the Fallbrook region. So the primary services we're looking to review, services and functions, are retail domestic water services, potable water services, wastewater sewer services, recycled water services, and then for the CSA, park and recreation services. San Luis Rey MWD provides groundwater protection services for local residents. This is again a bit different from the other services we'll be reviewing, but also with Sigma and the groundwater issues in the Palma Valley Basin, there'll be some good discussions about the future of the San Luis Rey MWD. So beyond that, the MSR itself is basically an intro with an overview on LAFCO and LAFCOs in general, including San Diego LAFCO, an executive summary of the report in terms of the recommendations and written determinations for each of the agencies. We provide agency profiles for each of the subjects, including overview information and background, history of the community and the development, the boundaries and the demographics of the population in the service areas, and then overview on the services that the district provides. Again, we get into organization and governance, discussion on the types of organization and governments of the different districts, and then also an overview on finances in terms of the audited financial statements, measurements of liquidity, margin, and then any other issues that we're looking at in terms of the particular agency, such as bonded indebtedness or special benefit assessments. And the accumulation of this, again, is the written determinations that serve to inform the review of the sphere for the particular agency. But that is basically what we're looking at with Fallbrook for those agencies. The status at the moment is basically discussion, gathering information, urban water management plans, master service plans, capital improvement programs, and any other documents for long-range planning that would inform the adequacy and the level of the current services, as well as the long-term planning for the agencies. So that's kind of an overview on the MSR in itself. For Fallbrook, obviously, we have local issues of concern, including the proposals, but also just general boundary issues with the surrounding districts and cities, as well as the surrounding fire districts with North County Fire and the County Fire Authority. All of that is taken into consideration. A public draft we're expecting to be coming out in the early spring, somewhat synced with the review of these proposals, I think, because of the broad focus on a number of the regional issues. I think that the consultants' work will also help to inform the MSR in terms of specific data for Rainbow and Fallbrook in particular. So again, that's all I have on the overview. And I'd again be happy to answer any questions if anyone has.
Thank you, Robert. So let me start off with the committee members. Any questions? I see one already. Sandy has done very well with the raise hand feature. Sandy, what say you?
Is that the MSR be completed concurrently with the reorganization proceeding to make sure that those are concurrently going, because they clearly have an effect on each other. Thank you.
I will just jump in and say they're not necessarily concurrent, but the MSR will be completed as a prerequisite before we take action on the reorganization proposals. They may be spaced out a bit, but the MSR will go first. Any other questions from the committee? Not seeing hands raised, not seeing eyebrows raised. So let me check in with our guests. Any of our guests online have a question? If you could use your hand raised feature. Not seeing anyone. Let me check in with Tammy. Tammy, were there any pre-registered comments or speakers for this item being 4C?
No registered speakers for item 4C.
Thank you, Tammy. Erica, any email comments received during Robert's presentation?
No live email comments received.
Okay, Robert, thank you so much for the update. We will now proceed to perhaps the main event, and let's bring in Michael Hanneman to the discussion. So Michael is our new LAFCA consultant. He was selected among a number of qualified consultants using the selection process that this advisory committee had identified and vetted through the subject agencies. And so I've asked Michael to come aboard for this first meeting and do some introductory comments about where he sees the analysis in this very early phase heading and how he's going to approach the scope of work. And I'll leave it to Michael to talk about the scope of work and again, specifically his approach. And Michael, I know we have a PowerPoint, so whenever you want to put that up on the screen, you just tell them and we'll go from there.
Let's start with that.
All right, we're go for the PowerPoint.
And while he's putting it up, I just want to say hello. It's very nice to meet you. And I'm very honored that you've chosen me to do this, to work on this issue with you. And I realize how important it is, how difficult it is. And so I take this very seriously. I'm going to cover 5 topics. I'm going to talk very briefly about myself. I'll mention the 3 topics I've been asked to work on. I'd like to talk with you about what I was thinking was the role you'd play and how we'd relate, and also how we'd maintain the record, and then talk about the substance of what I'm thinking of as the immediate next steps. So if you go to the next slide. So I'm an economist. The field is known as environmental and resource economics, and resource includes water as well as minerals and also things like fish and forestry. It's a field that got going really in the 1970s, the early 1970s. I was in graduate school, got interested in it, and I've been lucky enough, really lucky, to grow up with the field. I happened to be in the right place at the right time. I was a professor at Berkeley for 35 years, and I've come to ASU. I've been at ASU for 9 years. I still have a home in Berkeley. I would normally have been there because classes finished at ASU last week, and we normally spend December in Berkeley. We spend the summer in Berkeley, but with the craziness with COVID, we've decided to just stay put here in Phoenix. I work with graduate students at Berkeley. I still have an office in Berkeley, but I don't teach. At ASU, I teach and also work with students. I did my undergraduate work in England. I came to America to do my PhD. I met my wife, but even if I hadn't met Mary, it was clear to me that I should stay in America because the work climate, the research climate was, England was laid back, America was the real deal. Next slide, please. So I have had a successful academic career. And I've received a number of awards. I was elected to the National Academy of Sciences, which, except for the Nobel Prize in Economics, is more or less the highest prize you can go for. I'm an academic, I'm a scholar, I'm a researcher and a teacher. But I'm interested, my work is about the real world, in particular about water agencies like yours. And over the years, I've been fortunate enough to get involved as a consultant on a range of issues. These are just the water ones. I've worked in other areas on climate change and water pollution. I was, sitting, an innocent professor sitting in the ivory tower, living a quiet, uninteresting life until a senior colleague at Berkeley, who was the world's expert on wastewater treatment, brought me in 1980, this time 1985, so 35 years ago, to do the economic analysis for the State Water Resources Control Board, which was about to regulate discharge of agricultural drainage with selenium into the San Joaquin River. And so that's when I left the ivory tower. The state board liked that. They didn't have an economist on their staff. The Bay Delta hearings were starting, and they asked me to serve as the economic staff for that. And I worked on that and also Mono Lake. I worked with water agencies. I designed LA's water rates, which they used for 25 years. I was a consultant to the CUWCC on water rates. I was an advisor to the Blue Ribbon Committee for MET in 1993, looking at rates and financing, and the big issue was what was called then Dominigoni, and it's now the East Side Reservoir, and how to finance that. And I've been involved on other issues, as you can see. I've also done work. I was a member of the EPA Science Advisory Board, dealing with the issue of arsenic regulation. I've had the good fortune to visit Australia and actually write a history of water marketing in Australia. And the last thing I'll mention is, a common fallacy by non-economists and also by economists is economics is not the same as finance. And there are two different languages, two different cultures, two different civilizations. But I got involved in a couple of trials in California about whether municipality could take over an investor-owned water utility, Claremont and Apple Valley in San Bernardino County. And that was heavy-duty finance. So I worked with a team of accounting and MBA experts in testifying. And so I came to know and love CAFRs. Next slide. So I have a broad background through the chance of being asked to look at questions. Let me say, I've consulted, but I've consulted only on issues which I felt were important and intellectually interesting. You know, we don't have children. We have a wonderful wife who worked. I have a good salary. And so I'm not a hired gun. In all areas, I've worked on issues where I thought there's something important where I could try and help. Let's go. So I'm going to come back to the topics, but I wanted, if you take the next slide, I wanted to talk about how we would work together. And this is my suggestion. And so it's open for discussion. And it's really based on my experience with the State Water Resources Control Board regulating agricultural discharges to the San Joaquin River, which was a highly contested issue at the time. And then I worked about 15 years ago, IID knew this was after the QSA. And they knew they'd have to ramp down on their water use. And they knew that one day they would have to turn away requests for water from farmers. And the question was how to do it. And they'd had maybe 2 years of internal disagreement about that. And someone came up with the peculiar idea of asking an Englishman from Berkeley to come from outside and work with them and suggest a way of allocating water at times of shortage. And we had an 18-month process. Oh, it's a different context, but it has analogies with this. And we came to, I came up with a proposal that all the stakeholders supported and felt good about. And so based on what I did on those two occasions, I mean, looking back, we had regular meetings, you know, whether it was once a month or every other month, but we had regular meetings. And at each meeting, I told you what I'd done since the last meeting and what I'd learned, or what I thought I'd learned, and what conclusion I was leaning to, and ran these by you. And at the end of the meeting, I told you what I was planning to do between now and the next meeting. So you'd know what I was going to do, how I was going to do it. And if you had suggestions or whatever, I'd take them on board. So I'd like to work with you, you know, in a number of roles. You'd give me information, you'd act as a sounding board, you'd give advice, you'd give feedback. And I'd learn from this. And you'd know, and let me say, the one exception to this was the Bay Delta hearings, because that was a quasi-judicial proceedings. I was a staff member. I was a professor at Berkeley the whole time, but so I was doing this in addition to my day job. And by law, the staff could hold no ex parte communication with anybody. So there were 6 months of hearings in the fall of 1987. And then for the better part of a year, I and the other staff members drafted a report. And we weren't allowed to tell anybody, you know, what we were thinking, what direct we couldn't, there was no sounding board. we relied on the material in the hearings, but that was it. And that was what we came up with, upset almost everybody, cities, farmers, environmental groups. Not sharing my thinking, not just me, but the staff's not sharing our thinking as it evolved was terrible. I mean, it was legally required, but the setup was you had 6 months of hearings, and then a year later you had a final report, and that time span of digesting the information from the hearings and assimilating it, that was all done off stage. And I learned from that, it's important that there's an ongoing dialogue, both where you know how my thinking evolves, you know what data, what information I'm looking at, you give me feedback. And so at the end of the day, and this happened with the selenium in the San Joaquin River, it didn't happen with IID. There was total agreement, but at the end of the day, there still might be disagreement, but you know where I'm coming from. You understand how I got there and what I'm doing. And so it's anticipated and it's understood. So I was thinking that sort of relationship was productive. I found it very satisfying. I learned from it. And so I'm suggesting the same thing here. Next slide. And then the next topic is how we exchange information. And again, this is my suggestion based on what I've learned, and Holly, as an attorney, is the definitive source. I will rely on information that's provided to me by LAFCO staff. I'm open to receiving, additional information, and this touches on what was said at the beginning of today's meeting. But I think the procedure is it's submitted to LAFCO staff, to Robert, whoever, and he transmits it to me. So I've spent, when I came to Berkeley, or rather not right away, but in 1981, so 39 years ago, I started a course in the economics of water. And so I've learned a lot from teaching and research over 39 years. And so there'll be items that are not on the record, but that I think are relevant, and I'd like to draw on them. But it seems to me I should follow the same rules as you do. I go to the staff and I'd say, I'd like to add this to the record. And they may consult with you, or whatever. I mean, they'll have their procedure, and I add them to the record only if and when the staff approve that. And then at some points, I'll request what I call a quiet period, during which you won't submit extra material, or at least if you do, I won't look at it, because I will have sort of closed the window to digest and analyze the material up to that time. And then when I've digested it and produced a draft assessment, I'll report back to you. The quiet period will be over, and you'll give me comments and feedback. And you may say, you should have seen document X because you were going in the wrong direction. The facts are actually not what you assumed, and that's fine. So the quiet period is just to let me take stock as appropriate, and our interactions, me to you, you to me, will be through LAFCO staff. Next slide. So now I want to talk about the last, whatever it is, 4 slides or so, the sort of nuts and bolts of the immediate next steps. And again, this is just my suggestion. It occurred to me that of the 3 topics, supply reliability might be the most useful starting point, because the readings, let me just say one thing. I have downloaded everything on the LAFCO webpage. And I've scanned, I've read it, I've made notes on it, but I haven't read the detailed documents. So I'm just at the start of my work. And I have a sense of the issues from reading things, but I haven't gone into the meat of the numbers. That's, and I've only been doing this basically for over the weekend. So it occurred to me, if we start with the supply reliability, that's also a way of my becoming familiar with urban water management plans, with you know, the structure of supply, with the structure of demand, you know, so it's like the nuts and bolts of the physical systems. And then, so it seemed to me that's a logical starting point. And then we'd go on to finances and rates and fees. Next step. Next page, please. These are preliminary thoughts, I mean, very superficial thoughts. This is the major wholesale suppliers are Met and the county water authority, I mean, who are involved. Eastern will become a sort of, well, not a wholesaler, but anyhow, with the reorganization. But the point is, Met and county, for sure, their supply reliability largely determines Fallbrook and Rainbow. So that's the sort of logical sequence, I thought. And so I just put down the sort of high-level questions. And remember, this is, I'm coming in as an outsider, so you all know a lot about this and you may know the answers, and I'm getting up to speed with these questions. And at the bottom, I mentioned 3 nodes. Reliability is in relation to projected demand. So it's not just supply, it's what you think demand will be. And then the question is how adequate supply is to cover that. Obviously, you all use the urban water management plans, use metrics of reliability. There's some issues that have come up in that I think may be relevant that are not, for example, in the urban water management plans. But that's a discussion for our next meeting. Next slide, please. So I have, as I say, I've downloaded, printed out, read all the letters on the LAFCO webpage and sort of skimmed the detailed reports. I've looked at the county water webpage and the major report, and there's a ton of exhibits. And at this point, I haven't gone through them, and many won't be relevant, but I'm aware of them. There was a letter, I want to say, in October from Nossaman, the law firm, I think, Rainbow, which referenced a web page, but nothing happened when I clicked on it. So I wanted to mention that. And I've looked at the urban water management plans. And the substantive issue is in this last bullet. I wonder, this is whatever you think. I imagine you're working on the urban water management plan. Right now, the due date is July. And so I wondered, and you know, the answer may be, this is a terrible idea. But to the extent you have material, draft material from the 2020 urban water management plans, I wondered if I could look at that draft material, you know, treating it as confidential. You know, whatever you think best is fine with me. Let me go on. I just have, I think, one more slide. The next slide, please. So yeah, so This is what I was thinking of, and it's just a suggestion. It's open to feedback. I thought that basically, I don't know if you're scheduled next month's meeting, but if it's, about 4 weeks from now, whenever, I would go through the urban water management plans and other information that's already on the webpage, thinking about how to analyze supply reliability. And so I would work up not an assessment, but a kind of outline and notes on what I'm going to look at. So I would be, this next 4 weeks, I'd be learning about your systems, thinking about issues, but not doing an analysis that leads to conclusions. I'd meet with you at the next meeting. I'd tell you in more detail what I was going to do, what I was going to look for, how I was going to think about the supply reliability and get your feedback. And then I'd go off and have a quiet period and spend maybe 6 weeks coming up with, doing the analysis and coming up with a draft report. And then at the advisory committee meeting following that, when you've had time to look at it, we then go through that. You might say, or collectively, we might decide, I need to go back and fix some things or look at some issues, that I'd overlook. And so there might be an iteration or not. I mean, however it works. And then sort of when that's done, I go on to the finances and topic 2. And again, the same sort of thing. I might have a period where I'm brainstorming with myself. I'd come back to you, I'd present a plan. When you agree with it, I'd then go off and have a quiet period. So that's my presentation. That's what I have to say. So I'm very happy to, I'd like to get your reaction, and I'm very happy to answer any questions about anything.
Outstanding. Thank you, Michael. So I would like to do this a little more formally, and I'm going to go down the list of all 10 advisory members. If you are good with the approach that you heard from Michael in the next steps, you could just simply say you're good. If you have a follow-up question or maybe an alternative for us to consider, that would be the opportunity as well. And I'm going to start with our at-large members and end with our 4 subject agencies to give those 4 individuals a little more time to contemplate. But let me start in no particular order, although his last name would suggest this is order. Brian Albright, any thoughts, observations on Michael's kind of game plan going forward?
Yeah, thanks, Keen. I'm used to going first with a last name like Albright. Michael, I appreciate the overview of the presentation. The approach sounds reasonable to me. I don't have any issues with it at this point. I guess I would maybe reserve any potential additional thoughts after hearing from the rest of the members, but the approach looks good to me moving forward.
Thank you, Brian. And again, yeah, Brian makes a good point. We can certainly, after we have this initial round of discussion, check in with the public. We can go back if some extra observations are appropriate. So let me go to Rachel. Rachel, any thoughts, observations, questions that came up with Michael's approach?
No questions, I guess, as long as the timeline works in the scheme of this whole project. I guess I would be looking forward to hearing his analysis of the documents up to this point. So it seems like a reasonable amount of time to do that, but I didn't know what our overall timeline was for getting feedback and everything. So
let's come back to timeline. That's a good question. Thank you, Rachel. I'm going to go to Kim, Lydia, and Gary next. So Kim, what say you?
Thank you, Michael. I actually very much agree with your proposed process. I like the idea of preserving the record, communicating via the LAFCO staff and posting online. I think that's very transparent and I support it. On the quiet time issue, the only thing I would throw out there, I know this group, worked with many of these people for many years. We tend not to be quiet as a whole. And maybe you would consider in the process that if the executive director of LAFCO found something of vital importance during that 6-week period, that you would consider it and like have a waiver for anything that he thought was of critical importance. And that's it. Thank you.
Let me just say, no, you're right, and I don't want to seem a sort of prima donna. Don't talk to me. So no, that's fine. And the notion that Keen or Robert, exercise judgment, that's fine. So it's a relative quiet time, not an absolute quiet time.
Thank you.
Very good. And I forgot to mention, after we get done with this initial check-in with the committee members and before we go to the public, I do want to check in with our counsel, Holly Watley, for any observations she may have. So let's go now to Lydia, and then Gary and David, be ready. Lydia, what say you?
Hi. I agree with the comments thus far. I like the logical approach to the process that was laid out. Again, I want to echo my concern is timeline, making sure that we stay committed to the timelines that was initially outlined for this committee to do its work. And I think having a transparent process will be beneficial for this process and for the future of any other processes that might happen. That's it.
Thank you, Lydia. So now let's go to Gary and then David next.
Okay, I appreciate it. And I'm excited that we have Dr. Hammond on board and his team's ready to go. It's exciting. I think a couple of the issues that were raised in our response hasn't been addressed yet, but we look forward to it, which is what are MW rates going to be in the future. Specifically, the whole reason that Rainbow and Fallbrook are looking at detaching is for the purpose of lower rates. But I think it's key that the applicants will truly see that over the period of time. When the Water Authority's already invested its major water reliability projects, such as the Colorado River Conservation projects, desal facilities, some of the emergency supply stuff. But while a lot of MWD's initiatives include the Bay Delta Tunnel or tunnels, recycling water program that's yet to be accounted for. And that if we do, depending upon as we move forward with our negotiations with them in regards to the wheeling rates, that MWD has indicated that they're looking at charging San Diego County $18 billion or more over the term of the transfers. If we're able to get a more favorable agreement, that's great. But if not, the RCS, if it proves to be more cost effective and beneficial to San Diego, MWD would then lose its revenue source, thereby causing that rate to increase substantially. So either way, I'm excited with the doctor being on board. I think as he's looking at some of the different things, some of the things within the MWD water supply reliability, which is what those two agencies would be looking at rolling over to is simply on them. They would not be getting any of the reliability investment from Eastern. But the Bay Delta, that I know MWD is planning on spending $8 to $10 billion on that, and the 47 to 62% of the total project cost is about $15.9 billion of today's dollars. But the California Aqueduct, MWD will need to spend billions of dollars fixing the major subsidence problems with the California Aqueduct, and that they're looking at that cost being $3 to $5 billion. And then the regional recycled water project that they're developing, approximately 168 acre 168,000 acre feet of recycled water, and that's currently looking at a cost of about 3.4 billion or higher when expanded to direct followable reuse. So, like I said, just I know the doctor is familiar with a lot of these, but at least that way he knows specifically some of the things that as we move forward on it, some of the things that we're looking at, just to be able to determine. Just one last thing from me. As I had promised this group previously, I was able to meet with both Rainbow and with Fallbrook separately with their GM and one of their board members. We've talked about being able to come up with a couple ideas, at least getting 4 board members, the 2 of them and 2 board members that I'll pick from the Water Authority, just to be able to sit down and talk about, is there any other alternatives that could be beneficial to both agencies and specifically the region. So the nice thing is both have committed to that. I've committed to that. So we're going to be moving forward on that. As Sandy had talked about other things going on concurrently, that'll go on concurrently with this. And I would love to be at a future meeting of our group and be able to say, hey, we came up with an idea that is favorable to everybody. So just so this entire group, and so that Keen, so you're aware that that is moving forward. We do have some ideas, and hopeful that we make some progress in that area as well. Thank you.
Well, very good, Gary. And LAFCO staff wishes you well in that endeavor in coming up with some perhaps alternative solutions. So we're going to go to David, and then Nick and Jack, get ready. But David, floor is yours, sir.
Thank you, Keen, and welcome to Dr. Hanneman. I'm pleased to know that LAFCO has an experienced and knowledgeable consultant on board who has a good understanding of water issues. I would like to make sure, and I'm echoing Kimberly's comments, I would like to make sure that Dr. Hanneman gets access to all the critical information and facts that he will need to make an accurate and comprehensive report. To do this, we think it's very important that he meet, even if remotely, with all of the applicable agency staffs and agency consultants, and be able to talk to them about the relevant issues from the perspective of San Diego County water suppliers. And for example, he will need to meet with County Water Authority and MWD staff to understand how the Water Authority currently gets water from MWD, and how our QSA water is not the same, but significantly different than MWD imported supplies. As Chair Croucher noted, he will also have to have a full understanding of MWD's rates and what costs are coming for MWD, but which are not accounted for in its 10-year rate model. He will also need to meet with the Water Authority, Fallbrook, and Rainbow staffs to get a proper understanding of their regional water systems, including the type of capital projects needed or not for the 2 agencies to change over from the Water Authority to Eastern. He will need to meet with Water Authority and Eastern staff to compare services provided by each agency. He will need to meet with Water Authority finance staff to understand the obligations that the Water Authority incurred to meet the baseload water demands of Rainbow and Fallbrook customers, and what terms would be required on an exit so other member agencies are not harmed. He should meet with the Delta Water Master to understand the potential impacts on the Bay Delta of Fallbrook and Rainbow, switching from local water supplies back onto imported Bay Delta water from MWD. You will also need to meet with board members of Eastern to understand more fully how the proposed governance would work and any potential impacts on Eastern customers. We would hope that this would be a very transparent process where all affected agencies can participate, so that Dr. Hanneman hears all sides and sees where there are agreements and where there are differences that need to be investigated. This will be no small task. We look forward to working with Dr. Heineman and his team to accomplish the necessary work. Thank you, Kane.
Thank you, David. So let's go to Nick, and then Jack, Tom, and Sandy, you're in the bullpen.
Well, hi, Michael. This is Nick Canetis with Eastern Municipal Water District. Thank you very much for outlining what I thought was a very thoughtful, well thought through process. I'm generally very comfortable with what you spelled out. I'm comfortable with the approach that you've had to offer. I guess, as been mentioned previously, the timeline comes to question. It appears, with scheduling of meetings and reports out, we could be looking at a couple plus months for each topic. So I just would be concerned with a timeline that could drag out for quite some time. The one question that I did have, the first topic that you'd be addressing would be the water supply reliability question. And I'm just wondering if you anticipate that there would be definitive conclusions that are reached at each stage of those questions as they're being addressed, or whether they would be more of a draft position and then come to a final conclusion at the end when all three items are brought together at the end of the scope that you've outlined. So I'm curious about that. And then I would just offer up with regards to meetings or discussions directly with the subject agencies. Eastern is very open to having that dialogue as there's the need, or as you have questions as you get into the materials. But generally, I'm very comfortable with the approach that you've outlined.
Can I just answer, Nick, the point you raised about the relationship between the three topics? Someone was, raising earlier the question of Metropolitan and what its rates would be. But this is, Met. But this is a general point, not specific to Metropolitan. Of course, the reliability depends on investments that are made, and the rates depend on investments that are made. So there's an interconnection. So from that point of view, you couldn't say something you couldn't conclude the discussion of reliability, and then look at rates because of the connection. So some aspects will be connected, and from that point of view, you have to sort of look at everything, and then they come together. There may but I imagine there will be other points where you can reach a decision, on one topic without the other topic being all completed. And so what I'm thinking is I'd be mindful of that. And so sort of identify, what are my conclusions, and we can discuss them, but they could be finalized. But there'll be other aspects of this that are going to be contingent on sort of what comes later. So that's inevitable because of the interconnection.
Thank you. Thanks for that clarification. I look forward to working with you. Thank you.
Very good. And then Jack, and then Tom and Sandy, be ready. What say you, Jack?
Thank you, Keen. I'm very comfortable with what Dr. Hanneman's laid out. Fortunately, it looks like he's dealt with issues that are much more complex and contentious. Well, complex anyway, let's put it that way, than, Fallbrook-Rainbow detaching from the Water Authority and attaching to Eastern. I think, the approach of him going through the information, trying to get some additional information, and then sort of him deciding who he needs more information from, makes more sense than us telling him he's got to meet with, 20 people. He's been doing a lot of studies. I think he can figure a lot out from his review of the information. So I'm pretty comfortable with, him making that decision on who he needs to talk to and what information he really needs. The only thing I see that could be a bit of a challenge, I think the approach makes sense, is, we're working on sort of our demand projection updates right now. As you know, in Southern California, we've struggled to get it right. And sort of the past approaches have sort of continued to overestimate demand. So we're really focused on, spending some time this year ourselves, trying to dig into that a little bit. The other challenge that Fallbrook has is, we just spent about $60 million on a local supply project that comes online next year, which has a long, complicated history in itself. But that means now suddenly we have our own local supply that we've got to bring into our urban water management plan that's got hydrological impacts that we've got to go back and, we've got a lot of history on it, but we've got to bring that in. So I think it's important to bring that in, but the timing becomes a bit of a challenge. So that's something we'll have to work through. Though in the end, my sense, quite honestly, is, since we've already done a preliminary reliability assessment based on an old urban water management plan, all this does is sort of improve the situation. But that is something we'll have to kind of iterate through given the timing.
Yeah, let me just say, I realize, that everybody's still working on urban water management plans, and and even in June that may be true. So I'm looking for a way of trying to be flexible, and the starting point is the 2015 plans, which in many cases didn't come out until maybe a year later, so they're not incredibly out of date. But you in the agencies know what might be different and can alert. And that can be done in a communication that goes through the LAFCO staff. But so I'm not being anal about saying, show me the complete plan. But on the other extreme, the 2015 were done sort of in the middle of a drought, but things happened, and you learned from 2016 and 17 and 18. And so I'd like some blend of more recent experience, but in a way that's feasible, doesn't slow things down. So we need to work out, it's in everybody's interest. On the one hand, not to go out of date, but on the other hand, not to wait till all of the 2020 plans have been shipped off to DWR.
Right. And we're happy to share as we develop that information as draft. We'll be happy to share that.
Thank you, Jack. And so let's go to Tom, then Sandy, and then I'm going to redirect back to staff and Holly. But Tom, what say you?
Thank you, Keen, and thank you, Dr. Hanneman. I appreciate having you on board. It looks like this is going to be fun. I will echo some of the comments others made on the timeline. If I'm gauging your timeline right, with 4 weeks to comments in, then a 6-week quiet time to get a draft out, and then probably several weeks after that to get it done before going to the next topic. We're looking at 12, 14 weeks per topic, which could run into, over 40 weeks to get through this, which that timeline is a little bit challenging because the costs incurred by the applicants. And so if we could do some of that concurrently or tidy up those schedules a bit, it would be handy for us. I think that there's been mentioned by some of the previous folks about looking at some potential hypothetical situations about what if this huge capital project in the future happens, that the RCS or that MET has this other future capital project. I think that future hypothetical conditions might be glanced at, but there certainly shouldn't be the basis of forming a solid opinion because none of us know what the future brings. I think it's important for you to work with Keen, LAFCO staff, and even LAFCO council to understand how the Cortes and Hertzberg Act works with this regard, as well as the County Water Authority Act, and kind of frame the analysis based on meeting the statutory requirements. Because I know there's a lot of things that are somewhat tangential that are being tossed out here that really aren't part of what the law prescribes for this sort of analysis. And so I'd like to, while I don't have a mind looking at that sort of stuff, I don't want to spend a lot of extra time and money going down different rabbit holes when the statutes provide for what are the pertinent topics to be considered, both within LAFCO, local policies, CKH, and the County Water Authority Act. And so trimming the analysis to meet the requirements of the statutes would be an important focus for me.
If I can just respond, I appreciate you saying this. So actually taking your last point, what the statutes require. I'm not a lawyer, and so I will absolutely want guidance from Holly and her colleagues on these issues, and I'm not going to assume anything on my own. So I will be absolutely be guided. And with regard to the timeline, I haven't mapped out the specific timeline for the other bits, but they won't take as long as the first bit. So this first bit is really learning, not just about the supply reliability. I will be looking at CAFRs and thinking about this. So it's not three equal chunks of the same dimension. Rather, I thought the supply reliability is useful as a way of sort of learning about the whole systems, including stuff that will be relevant for the rates and other topics. So I'm using that as an excuse for the initial learning, that will spill over and serve for the other topics as well. So I certainly don't anticipate the other sections will take as long. How long they'll take exactly? I mean, the answer is when I start looking, it's going to be driven by what are the questions, and there'll be and what are the assumptions, and what's the information, and these are things that I'll discuss with you, and you'll weigh in, and we'll decide what set of questions are appropriate and what information is appropriate.
So to that end, would we expect at some point during this 4-week additional time period that there would be a Zoom call between myself and you, or Jack and you, or are you just going on the written stuff? Because if we're to submit additional information, how would we anticipate what additional?
I say, well, no, I was thinking during this, whatever the next 4 weeks, I'm not sure exactly. Submit. I think I suggested, for 2 weeks, but if you, I didn't see this as a quiet period. I saw this as a loud period. I've downloaded everything on the LAFCO webpage, and I've put it in binders and organized it so I sort of understand the contents. I haven't worked through them in details. But, if there's financing plans, or, if there's other documents that are relevant, you'll know them. And the next 2-3 weeks is the time to sort of speak up, let me, through the staff, make them available, and I'll look at them.
And Tom, I think we'll want at LAFCO staff, we're going to dive a little further into that issue of what goes on during this loud period, and how that loud period is the mechanics of it. So let's come back to that in a little more detail. But last but certainly not least, Sandy, what say you?
Thank you very much. And Dr. Hanneman, I want to thank you for your thoughtful presentation today, and in general, really appreciate you've outlined. Couple of comments for some of the things that have been said. That number one, the timeline's been talked about. I think as the conversation goes on, it just points out how complex these issues are, and there are no shortcuts to going through this process. This is complicated. This involves a lot of variables. It involves a lot of decisions that have been made for this region that can't be taken lightly. And so I believe it's going to take the time it needs to take to thoughtfully go through that process. I would say that there's an underlying issue of the applicant saying that the water authority rate structure is flawed or illegal. And so, there's going to need to be a lot of time spent on that part of it, and maybe even need to bring in some additional rate expertise, the detail of that, given the complexity of it. I find it interesting when I hear the Delta Tunnel and the recycled water are hypothetical. They're not. They're the basis of future reliability for Met. And so it is germane to the conversation. And to the point you said earlier, which is your investment in supply reliability directly relates to your rates and charges, and they can't be extricated from each other. Rate setting is not any easier or less complex than reliability, and this is going to need to be the subject of quite a bit of discussion. I would also say that with regard to the draft urban water management plan for 2020, we can have the draft to you in early February. I think it's important that you see that within the context of the overall urban water management plan. And again, we can have that to you early in February. Look forward to working with you and going through this process thoughtfully. I think I heard comment early on that you didn't need to talk to each agency individually, and then I heard Tom talk about some specifics of what he wanted to talk about. I just want to underscore that I do think it's important that you have a conversation with each agency about some of the issues that I'm not talking days of conversation, but I think it is important to be able to engage in some of the information that has been presented. And I just wanted to note that Tom is not an attorney either. So as he was quoting, you were saying, I'm not an attorney. He isn't as well, and Holly is, and Kim is. So I would encourage you, in terms of what the County Water Authority Act says, what the Knox, Hertzberg implications are, that you go to those sources. And the best source of information on the County Water Authority Act is the Water Authority's General Counsel, Mark Haddam. So just want to underscore that. Thank you.
Thank you, Sandy.
My University of Wikipedia law degree is back there on the wall.
I'm sure it was earned. Thank you, Tom. Let's talk to a real attorney, and I'm going to ask Holly Watley to chime in as you see fit. Holly, observations, additions as you see fit.
Sure. The Professor Hanneman got it right when he called out the distinction of a quasi-judicial proceeding from what we're doing here, which is quasi-legislative. That said, we do think it is important, that we have a process where the interested parties and the public can share information, but that also prevents the staff and Professor Hanneman from being in a situation where we have unending submittals. So I just want to echo that any contact from the applicants or the water authority should initially come to staff, and then staff can then be the interface with the professor. And it will also go the other way. Professor Hanneman may, in looking at materials, say, okay, I do have a question. I do want to have a phone call, a meeting, or what have you, with someone from the authority or with Rainbow. That will be facilitated through staff as sort of the gatekeeper of all of this going back and forth. I mean, we anticipate that a lot of the feedback is going to be at these public meetings that are noticed under the Brown Act, that are taped, that are open for public comment. At the same time, recognizing there may be some instances where we reach out outside of a meeting, but still, I think it's good if we keep everything as transparent as possible, and if we can do most of it at the meetings, that would be our goal.
Thank you, Holly. So let me check in with First, and I'm going to go to those who might be guests on our Zoom box. Let me check in with Tammy. Hello, Tammy. Did we have any pre-registered speakers for this item or pre-submitted comments on this item?
No, there was no registered speakers for this item.
Thank you, Tammy. Let's go over to Erica. Erica, did we solicit any emails in the course of Mr. Hanneman's presentation from the public?
No live email comments.
Thank you, Erica. And so I'm looking at the participant list. I know that there are some guests joining us on Zoom. If any of you would like to ask a question or make a declaration of some sort, the more provocative, the better. This is your chance. Seeing none, I want to just drill down on a couple of themes that I heard, and I'll defer Robert if you want to jump back in if you had any observations too. But I think there was a general agreement with Michael's game plan going forward. The two sources of perhaps some issues in the Hanneman game plan was, well, the timeline. You know, I think Michael addressed that towards the end, that the supply focus initially will inform the other two items. And so there should be some relative expedience once we get past the first topic in informing the last two. So to Tom's comment, I don't think we're suggesting it's a 42-weeker, but it's certainly going to at least be some upfront lifting, and we'll assume we'll pick up some steam from there. And then the other issue, which, you know, I can see both ways, right? The question is coming up, well, how do we interchange information that comes up in Michael's focus of the record in trying to make sense of the record by asking questions perhaps directly of some of the agencies. I think Holly is correct that in order for this process to be as clean and as transparent as we all want it to be, we're going to, and I'm going to ask this question of the committee. So this is in the form of a question, and I'm going to rely first and foremost on our 6 at-large members. My thinking is defer to Michael to decide when he needs to have a direct follow-up with the agencies, as opposed to perhaps, you know, a proactive approach to line up conversations with Michael with the agencies. I think this puts it in control of Michael, and he can decide based on his experience, you know, where are the missing links and who he should talk to. And those requests go presumably through Robert or me. And so just focusing in on the at-large members, you know, Brian, Kim, Rachel, Gary, Lydia, and David, does that seem fair that at least unless we decide that that's not working, we just defer to Michael to decide when he needs to talk to the other or to the agencies directly, and if so, do it through Robert or me? Does that seem fair? Again, Brian, Rachel, Gary, David, Lydia, Kim. Someone jump in. I see an affirmative from, I see some hands actually.
Well,
we're going to hold off on the subject agencies. Kim, what say you?
I would be comfortable that so long as if he did have follow-up questions, that he didn't just go to one agency, that all of the parties had that opportunity to provide information. That would be my only suggestion.
Very good, David. What say you, sir?
I think it is important to engage with all of the interested parties and the agencies involved, and perfectly satisfactory if that's facilitated by and through LAFCO. But I think it is important to make sure that Dr. Hanneman has access to all the relevant information and commentary from various agencies. Thank you.
And I guess the extra part I did not verbalized was these check-ins that Michael would be doing at the ad hoc committee meetings would be then the opportunity, in my mind, for some of the other interested subject agencies, Valicitos, Vista, whoever, to then weigh in and provide Michael comments. The key is, in my mind, to limit the amount of information Michael has to go through when he does encounter questions or issues for clarification. He go through LAFCO, and then as he does these updates to the committee, will it be the opportunity for, again, the Valicitoses of the world to say, hey, there is an extra ingredient that's not necessarily being accounted for. It's not to say, by the way, committee members, that come February, if the process has become clunky and needs some W-40, we not revisit it. But I think just in the beginning, that would be my preference. And David, your comments are noted. We do want to get input from the agencies. It's just a function of trying to facilitate it in a way that doesn't become too, layered. There's probably a better phrase, but layered is the one that's coming to my mind. Let me just check in now with the subject agencies. I see Tom and Jack. Tom, your hand was first. Go ahead, sir.
Well, when you were talking about the members of this ad hoc committee who aren't the subject agencies, you included the chair of the Water Authority and another Water Authority board member. And I kind of felt that Brian and Rachel and Lydia and Kim were those non-affiliated folks. So because those other guys are Water Authority folks. So just clarifying that relationship. And as I recall, when we set this thing up, they were brought on to counterbalance Nick, Jack, and I as far as numerical representation, and are really part of the effect.
You are correct, although there's some gray to this.
That's why I'm clarifying.
Point taken. Thank you, sir. Jack, hopefully this isn't drilling down any more missteps on my end, because there could be a mute button here.
It's not. I just want to make sure. I think the point was made, and I think the approach you outlined was reasonable. Just to remind everyone that this gets funded by Fallbrook-Rainbow, and Fallbrook-Rainbow together are some 50,000 people, I guess, or something like that. So I think it's important we're careful about, Tom sort of mentioned sending, Dr. Hanneman on rabbit trails. And so having, anyone calling him and him having to spend an hour with, just random agencies just to kind of bog this down isn't necessarily the most effective manner. So I think the kind of approach of, him getting through initial kind of take on material, maybe at least having sort of an initial call with at least, Fallbrook-Rainbow and the Water Authority on reliability, just kind of with his set of big picture questions or clarifications, maybe is sort of an in-between that makes sense. But I don't think either party should be able to come up with a list of 10 people we demand he talks to. I think it's really on him to, decide maybe after those initial conversations and initial review of the material what makes sense. So I think the approach as you have it outlined makes sense.
Thank you. And let's go to Gary.
No, I appreciate it, and I think as long as we get the input, that's key. And whether it's these talking points, and if you have me on one group or the other, I think you're going through all groups. So I appreciate that. I want to take a positive approach on it. I think that the doctor needs to take a look at the paperwork and the information he has at hand already. As he has that, it's obviously going to create some questions that he has. So I think as we get through the process, it'll be a natural deal. But having LAFCO in there to help facilitate that is a good thing, because it's that way you're not getting, or he's not getting inundated down 30 different directions, but he's also not being limited to 2 directions. So I think there's a common ground there, and it's when it comes down to the end of the day, I look at LAFCO as being able to make some common sense recommendations as far as, yes, this is pertinent, no, it's not, and this is just a stall tactic by somebody. So I think recognizing that, and then if as we move farther down the line, if there's something not being addressed in the draft reports, obviously we can say, hey, I noticed that this one thing that was a key point for us or them or whoever is not being addressed. Could we get further clarification on that? And I think I have some valuable information on that, I think is reasonable. So I think for all of us, not saying one side or balancing it to the other side, is just, I think, a common sense, open mind on letting LAFCO take the lead, and that we'll supply input as possible. If there's something, like I said, if it's not being addressed, there's nothing that we can address at the next meeting too. So I fully agree with the process. I like the fact that we'll all still be able to supply information, but at the same point, giving the doctor some time to take a look at things before we inundate them with a whole second or third or fourth round of things. So I fully support it. And Keen, I really appreciate your approach on this.
And thank you, Gary, for being positive, unlike Tom in his critiquing of my moderating abilities. I do appreciate that. That will make the minutes. So let's go to Sandy and then Tom, and then let's wrap this up with some last minute comments from Michael, Holly, and or Robert. Sandy, this is
Thank you. I was on, sorry. So I just wanted to say a couple of things. One is to make a clarification. You will recall that when the original composition of this ad hoc committee was set up, and it was said that I cannot speak on behalf of all member agencies, and we had Rainbow, Fallbrook, and Eastern presumably representing one side of the issue. Gary and David were brought on to represent perspective, not the water authority. So I want to be clear about that. From the comment that Tom had made. Again, just to reiterate, I think my intent in saying that Dr. Hanneman touched base with each of the agencies with the LAFCO staff is really if there's questions about or clarification in the information presented. It's not to have multiple conversations or lists of people speak to doctor. I think that's anything that we're talking about. And I would also say, again, this is complicated. It's going to take the time it's going to take. And this is not an issue to be taken lightly. This is not something that has been done before throughout the state of California. And so it's going to take a little time. So those are my thoughts.
Thank you, Sandy. So Tom, did you, you had your hand up, now it's down. Did you? Okay, thank you, sir. Gary, did you have something to add, or is your hand just up from before?
Just up from before.
Okay, very
doing,
good.
Doing my exercises, so I'll lower it.
Fair enough. So let me just check in. Michael, Holly, Robert, I think we have good direction to proceed with Michael's game plan. And we can summarize that in an email that will go out in the next 24 hours or so everyone understands we're going to proceed with a little more of a loud period before maybe setting the quiet period intact. So that said, Michael, Holly, Robert, any additional comments or observations?
This is Robert. I'm sorry, just a quick thought. In the future, as we're moving forward with Dr. Hanneman, it would be definitely preferable that all communications through him would be CC'd through myself or Keen or both.
Yes.
That way we can make sure that everyone is getting the same amount of information through this conversation. And again, I'm available on the fly if anybody needs any information, and I look forward to working with you all as we move forward.
Thank you, Robert. Michael, you were going to mention something?
I just want to say, I understand the different concerns, and what I wanted to emphasize is I want to be helpful. I want to move this forward, but in a way that you're all satisfied with. And so, you know, when I suggest, I want to be flexible, you know, but I want to do this in a manner that is transparent, but also withstand scrutiny. So I'm not, as I say, I'm not a prima donna or anything else. I want to make this flow and work and work in good time in the best possible way. And I fully appreciate the complexities and the sort of difficulties that we're trying to surmount and make this work. And I want to work with you and with the LAFCO staff to accomplish this. So I really appreciate your thoughtfulness.
Thank you, Michael.
Thank you.
Very good. Holly, anything on your end? Okay, very good. So this brings us to the last item, which is agenda setting. I think we've pretty much covered the agenda setting in this most last discussion. My thinking would be, if January 4th works for everyone, that we at least tentatively hold that date for the next committee meeting. And that would be an opportunity, as Michael would say, for him to do a check-in, tell you what he heard and learned from this session and what he's been up to. Appreciate it's a holiday period too. So we'll do a confirmation email on everyone's calendar, but if you could hold January 4th, I think that would be preferable on our end to keep the momentum going. Very good. And so last but not least, I just want to check in with Erica. Were there any emails that were generated in the course of our meeting today, Erica, that we want to get to? Erica, are you still with us?
Yes, I'm here. No emails.
Very good. Thank you so much. So let me just double check if I'm missing anything on the agenda itself. No. So I'm going to call this meeting to adjournment at 3:07. Thank you all for your participation. I very much appreciate it. We will generate an email summarizing the next steps as we've discussed, and we'll go from there. So have a safe and happy Christmas. Thank you all.
Merry Christmas, everybody. Happy Hanukkah, etc.
Happy holidays. Thank you.